Although the federal government has operated under the same constitution for nearly all of its history, it is not uncommon for states to go through several constitutions. PA is no different in this regard. The state of Pennsylvania has operated under 5 different constitutions: the Constitution of 1776, the Constitution of 1790, the Constitution of 1838, the Constitution of 1874, and the Constitution of 1968. Pennsylvania never had an official quote-unquote constitution as a British colony. Rather, it was governed by the book A Frame of Government. After 13 colonies declared independence from Great Britain, it was highly recommended by the Continental Congress that each state adopted a unique constitution. Pennsylvania quickly adopted the Constitution of 1776. The first half of the Constitution of 1776 contained what is known as the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights. Influenced heavily by Quaker ideals, it was written that all men have a right to life, liberty, property, happiness, and safety. The Declaration of Rights was a major influence on what would become the Bill of Rights in 1791. The Constitution of 1776 was unique with its government structure. This was done in large part due to Quaker tradesmen in eastern Pennsylvania being apprehensive towards the western settlers, who resented them for refusing to send any military support to defend against the Indian attacks. The PA government contained a unicameral legislature with effectively all governing powers. The judicial branch consisted of judges who were appointed to 7-year terms, and the weak executive branch consisted of a council known as the Council of Censors, who could recommend laws be repealed or a constitution amended once every 7 years. The system ended up being a disaster because of the lack of checks and balances. The legislature had total control, and the executive branch had no veto power, because the people themselves were intended to keep the legislature in check. It quickly became apparent to many Pennsylvanians that the government structure laid out in the Constitution of 1776 was deeply flawed. In the 1780s, a campaign began to revise the Constitution. This led to a convention being held in 1789, for which the Constitution of 1790 was created. The Constitution of 1790 more closely resembled the current government structure. It established a bicameral legislature elected by the people, a single governor elected for a 3-year term with veto power, and for a judiciary appointed by the governor, removable only by impeachment. Unlike the Constitution of 1776, the Declaration of Rights included in the Constitution of 1790 prohibited the legislature from taking away any individual rights protected by the Declaration. The Constitution was considered a major upgrade over the previous Constitution, and in some regards considered a model constitution. This is due to the effective checks and balances and sufficient protection of individual liberties. Many Pennsylvanians felt that the governor's power to appoint judges needed to be limited in order to keep the governor in check. In 1837, a constitutional convention was held, which voters approved the results of. The Constitution of 1838 limited judges to 15-year-long terms. It also revoked the governor's ability to appoint local officials, and the appointment of judges became a shared power of the Pennsylvania Senate. Another important detail was that the Constitution of 1838 contained a provision that laid out how to amend the Constitution without changing it entirely. This provision is still included in the Pennsylvania Constitution to this day. In the mid to late 1800s, Pennsylvania experienced a period of rapid population and economic growth. This led to there being many corrupt legislators who would make special deals with corporations and give lobbyists whatever they demanded. Many people began the call for another constitutional convention, which would eventually be held in 1873. The Constitution of 1874 made many changes to the Pennsylvania government. Firstly, the size of the legislature was expanded, because it was believed that it would be more difficult to buy out a larger number of legislators. The ability for legislators to grant special favors to corporations was greatly reduced. There was also provisions set in place to prevent corporations from forming monopolies. Additionally, all bills proposed in the legislature would have to be upfront with their subject in their title. Bills had to be about one specific thing, and cannot have their purpose changed after they had already been proposed. Lastly, the governor's veto power was altered. The governor was given the ability to do a line-item veto, where only a specific portion of a bill was vetoed. The threshold to override a veto was also raised to 2/3 in both chambers. Many Pennsylvanians believed that the Constitution of 1874 was inadequate for the 20th century and needed to be changed. Calls for a new convention began in the 1950s, and one was eventually held in 1967. The Pennsylvania Constitution in 1968 completely revised the judicial branch. It created a unified judicial system and a new intermediate appellate court known as the Commonwealth Court. It created the Philadelphia Municipal Court and authorized the creation of community courts. The Supreme Court was given power to supervise all courts in the state and gave them extensive rule-making powers. The 1968 Constitution also allowed municipalities to adopt home rule. It created the current reapportionment system, which reapportions legislative districts every 10 years. The governor and lieutenant governor were required to run on the same ticket and were made eligible for a second term in the Constitution of 1968.